9:48 p.m., January 31st. A car pulls into a driveway in Tucson, Arizona. A son-in-law drops off an 84-year-old woman after dinner with her daughter. He watches her walk towards her front door. That is the last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie. By the next morning, she's not where she's supposed to be. By that afternoon, she's a missing person. And for the next several days, the Pima County Sheriff's Office is going to make a series of decisions about what kind of case this is, how urgently to treat her home, who to call in and when, that a sitting sheriff would later stand in front of a camera and admit, in his own words, he'd have done it differently. This is the case that's obsessed the country for months. Tonight, I'm not giving you another recap. I'm giving you the 96 hours that mattered most, and the decision at hour 1 that shaped everything after it. This is Help Solve the Case. I'm Christine Burke. I'm a retired law enforcement detective and sergeant and current law enforcement expert. I love everything court-related, and unfortunately, sometimes I have to make the Monday morning quarterback calls so that we can learn, so that we can do different, and we can do better. This is episode 2. And this is very important about who makes the decision of whether it's a crime or not, and the ramifications that come after. Nancy Guthrie, the mother of Today's Show anchor Savannah Guthrie, was reported missing on February 1st when she failed to show up at a friend's home to watch a church service. Her family knew immediately something was wrong. An 84-year-old woman dropped off safely the night before, simply gone. Here's the decision point, and I want you to feel how fast it happens. Within the first hours, the working theory inside the department leaned toward what investigators call an elderly walkaway. Disorientation, wandering, a real and common phenomenon with older adults. It's not an unreasonable first read. I'm not going to pretend it is, but watch what that read does to the house. A neighbor has said she begged deputies to investigate the empty house at the very start, before anyone called it a crime scene, before the tape went up the first time. Think about that for a second. Someone standing right there telling law enforcement, hey, this doesn't look like a wandering grandmother situation, and the classification hadn't caught up to what she already knew. Then, on February 2nd, everything flips. Sheriff Chris Nana stands in front of the cameras and says the sentence that changed the entire case. Quote, we believe now, after we process that crime scene, that we do, in fact, have a crime scene, end quote. Blood, later confirmed on the front porch. A doorbell camera removed. Nanos himself would go on to say he believed Guthrie was abducted. Quote, she didn't walk from there. She didn't go willingly, end quote. That's not me seeing it. That's the sheriff, on the record, describing his own read of the scene. So here's Act 1's question, and it's the one this series is built on. If the classification had started as, quote, crime scene, end quote, instead of, quote, wellness check, end quote, what would hour 1 have looked like instead? Would we still be where we are today with absolutely no answers? This is where the story stops being about what happened to Nancy Guthrie and starts being about what happened to the evidence. By Nanos' own account, the home was released back to the family and the crime scene tape came down. And then it had to go back up days later for further processing. He told reporters afterward, quote, I probably could have held off on that, end quote. FBI Director Kash Patel said his agency wasn't allowed into the investigation for 4 days, and that the delay likely cost investigators Nest camera footage that may have been permanently deleted by the time they got access. By then, people had already walked up to that same front porch where her blood was later confirmed. I want to explain why this happens, because it's not unique to Pima County. And it's not random. There's a phrase you've heard if you've ever called police about something that felt wrong and you've gotten waved off. That's a civil matter. Nothing we get involved in. No, not a crime. It's not a legal finding. It's a discretionary call made fast by one person. And one of the quiet reasons departments lean towards the less urgent read is the same reason a department is slow to call something a crime scene at hour 1. Every crime a department reports gets counted, published, and compared, city to city, year to year, through the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program. A rising number looks bad for a sheriff, a police chief, a mayor. A department doesn't need a memo telling officers to slow walk classification for that pressure to exist. It just needs everybody up the chain to know which direction the number is supposed to move. That pressure has a very specific address in this case, the Pima County Board of Supervisors, the elected body that oversees the sheriff's budget and, as it turns out, the sheriff's job. This isn't theoretical for Nanos. Supervisors have since directed outside counsel to compel sworn statements from him over what one supervisor called a career, quote, based on fraud, end quote. They considered removing him outright. That motion failed, and instead they referred perjury allegations against him to the Arizona Attorney General. None of that is about the disappearance itself. It's about a resume that misrepresented his work history and testimony under oath that records appear to contradict. But it tells you something essential about the pressure a sheriff in this exact position operates under. Elected people with the power to end his career are watching every decision he makes on the highest profile case of his tenure. Here's the wider version of that same pressure, because it doesn't only exist in Pima County. Cities and counties care enormously about their reported crime numbers, for reasons that have nothing to do with any case. Falling crime numbers makes borrowing money cheaper for a city's bond rating. It makes insurance pricing better for residents. It makes the pitch to a business deciding where to relocate stronger. An elected mayor or county commissioner running for re-election wants to stand up and say crime is down on their watch. And a sheriff who wants that same commissioner's support for next year's budget has every incentive to help make that true, at least on paper. None of that requires a conspiracy or a phone call telling a deputy to slow walk a report. It just requires everyone up the chain understanding, informally, which direction the number is supposed to move. And an elderly walkaway costs that number nothing, while a crime scene and everything that comes with staffing one costs plenty. Here's the question Court TV would ask, and I'm going to ask it directly instead of dancing around it. Was the early handling of this scene a defensible, honest misread of an elderly walkaway, or was it something closer to ego, a sheriff who doesn't like being told he's wrong, moving too slowly to admit the scene needed to stay locked down? I can't read Chris Nanos' mind, and I'm not going to pretend I can. What I can show you is the pattern. When reporting first surfaced questioning his work history, he called it a, quote, hit piece, end quote, before eventually correcting the record. When his handling of the case was questioned early by his own account, he initially defended decisions he later reversed. Quote, I probably could have held off on that, end quote, is an admission. But it's an admission that came after the fact, not in the moment when it would have protected the evidence. A person's instinct to defend a call they've already made publicly, rather than reverse it fast, is a very human failure mode. And in this line of work, it's an expensive one, because evidence doesn't wait for anyone to be ready to admit they were wrong. I want to be fair to the other side of this too, because it's real. Understaffed departments make this exact call under real-time pressure with genuinely good intentions, constantly. Not every slow classification is ego. Some of it is a tired deputy on a Tuesday night weighing 40 other calls. I can't tell you with certainty which one this was. I can tell you the cost was the same either way. Here's the detail that makes me lean toward ego over honest mistake, though, and I want to lay it out plainly because it's on the record. In a deposition tied to this case, Nanos reportedly testified under oath that he had never been suspended as an officer. Records obtained by the Arizona Republic show multiple suspensions and that he resigned from the El Paso Police Department in lieu of termination back in 1982, 2 years earlier, and under far worse circumstances than what his own resume said for years. That's not a clerical error about a missing person case. That's a pattern. Dismiss the challenge first. Correct the record only once it's undeniable. If that's how a person responds to being questioned about his own resume, it tells you something about how he might respond in the moment to being told his handling of a crime scene needs to change course immediately. I don't want to lose the human center of this story underneath all the procedure, because that's exactly what happens to families in cases like this. The classification argument becomes the story, and the person who's actually missing becomes background noise. Nancy's daughter, Annie, had dinner with her mother that same night. Her husband was the one who dropped Nancy off at 9:48. The family didn't just lose a mother and grandmother. They've had to watch in real time a sheriff walk back his own statements about their home 3 separate times, watch supervisors accuse that same sheriff of building a career on fraud, and watch a national press corps treat their private tragedy as a running procedural drama. Every hour spent adjudicating whether this was a walkaway or a crime scene was an hour Nancy Guthrie spent not knowing, and every news cycle about Nancy's resume was a news cycle that had nothing to do with finding her mother and everything to do with whether the man leading the search could be trusted to tell the truth about anything at all. Now the accounting. Money matters here too, and it's not abstract. Search and rescue assets run roughly $1,200 to $3,000 an hour depending on the aircraft. Guthrie's search plane sat grounded for hours early on, not because of anything in her case, but because of an unrelated personnel dispute involving the pilot. That's a resource decision made for reasons that had nothing to do with the classification question I just walked you through, and it cost real search time in the window that mattered most. But the bigger cost isn't the plane. It's what a released, retaped, 4 days delayed crime scene does to future prosecution. If this case ever produces a suspect, a prosecutor has to build that case with whatever evidence survived those first few days. Chain of custody, scene integrity, the window when that porch was accessible to anyone who walked up to it. All of it becomes cross-examination material for a defense attorney, regardless of who's eventually charged. A prosecutor doesn't get to try the case they wish they had. They try the case the first 4 days left them. Zoom out even further, and the number gets uncomfortable fast. Rand Corporation puts the average cost of a full homicide investigation at $144,000 to $177,000. Officer time, lab work, supervision, overhead, from first response through trial testimony. That's the number Pima County is implicitly signing up for the longer this stays classified as an active crime instead of a closed wellness check. And let me tell you, it's probably going to be a lot more. A department that leans toward the cheaper classification in hour 1 isn't always doing math consciously, but the math exists whether anyone says it out loud or not. Treating something as a not crime costs almost nothing. Treating it as a crime is expensive on purpose because the alternative, guessing wrong, is unrecoverable. If I'm the on-call detective getting that first report, my instinct is boring and unglamorous. Treat the residents like a scene until someone proves to me it isn't one. That costs a few hours of tape and a patrol unit's time if I'm wrong. It costs irreplaceable evidence if I'm right and I didn't. Nancy Guthrie's case is still open tonight. No arrest, no confirmed proofs of life. A sheriff whose own career is now under a separate cloud of scrutiny that has nothing to do with her disappearance and everything to do with whether the public can trust his account of it. In the next episode, I'm taking you into a case that's happening live right now, where the same question, walkaway or crime scene, wellness check or homicide, is being decided in real time in front of cameras by a sheriff who says it's a drowning and a family who says otherwise. Nolan Wells. I'll see you there. Thanks for the support. Thanks for stopping by, and we appreciate your support.